The streets of Paris shimmered under the golden glow of street lamps as Elena Moreau walked past the familiar rows of bookshops along the Seine. The evening air carried the scent of fresh rain, and the quiet murmur of lovers strolling beneath the stars filled the city with its timeless romance. But Elena was not here for love. She was here for answers. In her hands, she clutched a small, faded letter, its edges softened by time. The ink had smudged in places, but the words still burned into her mind. "Meet me at the Café de Lumière at midnight. If you don't come, I'll know your answer." It had been signed by Julien Beaumont, the man she had once loved, the man she had left behind. That was 5 years ago, and she had never come. Now, standing in front of the small cafe, its windows glowing with warm golden light, her heart pounded with the weight of what could have been. What if she had read the letter in time? What if she had come that night? Would everything be different now? A soft chime echoed as she pushed the door open. The cafe smelled of freshly brewed espresso and warm pastries, the air thick with nostalgia. She didn't know what she was expecting. Perhaps an empty chair by the window, an imprint of a memory that had long since faded. But what she saw instead made her breath catch. A man sat at the very table where Julien had asked her to meet him all those years ago. His dark hair had the same tousled mess she remembered. His sharp jawline was unmistakable. And when he looked up, Julien was still waiting. Elena's entire world tilted. She had come too late. Far too late. Or maybe she was just in time. Elena froze in the doorway. Her fingers tightened around the old letter as she stared at Julien, the man she had spent years trying to forget. But how could she? He was sitting exactly where he had promised to wait for her 5 years ago, as if time had never moved forward. Julien's gaze locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. A flicker of something shock? Pain crossed his face before he leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Elena." His voice was quiet, but it carried through the cafe like a whisper from the past. She forced herself to breathe. "Julien." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid, with 5 years of missed chances and unspoken regrets. Finally, Julien gestured to the empty chair across from him. "You're late." Elena hesitated before slowly stepping forward. She sank into the chair, her hands trembling slightly as she set the old letter on the table between them. Julien's eyes flickered to it. His jaw tensed. "You found it," he said, his voice laced with something she couldn't quite name. Elena nodded. "Not soon enough." Julien let out a quiet laugh, not of amusement, but of disbelief. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "So, what now? You finally read my words, and suddenly you're here." His words stung, but she couldn't blame him. "I didn't see the letter until last week," she admitted. "It was buried in my things. I thought you had never reached out." Julien's expression hardened, but there was sadness in his eyes. "And if you had read it back then, would you have come?" Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to tell him she would have run through the streets of Paris, straight into his arms. But the truth was messier than that. "I don't know," she whispered. Julien studied her, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. "You know, I waited that night, until the sun came up." Her heart twisted. "Julien." He shook his head. "And then I told myself I would never wait for you again." Elena felt like the walls were closing in on her. She had spent years convincing herself that their love had faded, that it was just a memory. But sitting across from him now, she knew the truth. It had never faded. And by the way Julien was looking at her, she realized. Neither had his. The past was still between them, unfinished. But was there still a future? The hum of the cafe faded into the background, drowned out by the silence between them. The scent of fresh coffee, the soft clatter of spoons against porcelain, it all felt distant, as if the world outside this moment had ceased to exist. Elena's chest tightened as she watched Julien, his hands curled around his cup, his gaze cast downward. He wasn't angry. He wasn't indifferent. But he was guarded, as if time had built walls around his heart, and she was standing at the edge, uncertain whether she still had the right to climb them. "I should have come," she said finally. Julien looked up, his dark eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Then why didn't you?" Elena swallowed, the weight of the truth pressing against her ribs. "I was afraid." Julien gave a dry laugh. "Of what?" She met his gaze, her fingers trembling slightly. "Of what you meant to me." Julien's expression softened, just for a moment, before he leaned back, sighing. "And now?" Elena hesitated. "What now? Could love truly wait 5 years? Could the past still find its way back into the present?" She reached for the letter on the table, running her fingers over the ink. "When I found this, I realized something. I've spent all these years trying to convince myself that I made the right choice." Julien tilted his head. "And?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I was wrong." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Elena leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Did you ever stop waiting?" Julien let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping against his cup. "I tried," he admitted. "I told myself I wouldn't be the fool sitting at this table, waiting for something that was never coming." Her heart ached. But she pressed, barely breathing. Julien's lips quirked into a sad smile. "But somehow, I always ended up here." A lump rose in Elena's throat. She had spent so long convincing herself that love could be forgotten, that it could be buried under the weight of time and distance. But love, true love, didn't work like that. And as she sat there, watching Julien struggle between holding onto the past and protecting himself from the present, she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Not if she could help it. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "Julien," she whispered, "do you still love me?" His eyes met hers, raw and unguarded. For the first time that night, she saw the truth shining through. And it terrified her. Because she knew the answer. And so did he. But was love enough? Julien didn't answer right away. His fingers, still touching hers, tensed slightly, as if he wasn't sure whether to pull away or hold on. His eyes, those same eyes she had fallen in love with all those years ago, held a storm of emotions. The air between them crackled with everything unspoken. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know," he said quietly. Elena's heart dropped. Julien exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what's worse. That I waited for you, or that after all these years, you're here, and I don't know if I can let myself believe in this again." Elena swallowed against the lump in her throat. "Julien, I loved you," he cut in, his voice raw. "I loved you enough to wait. But time changes people, Elena." The weight of his words crushed her. She had spent years imagining this moment, believing that if she ever found her way back to him, he would be waiting with open arms. But love wasn't frozen in time. It grew or it faded. And now, she wasn't sure which had happened between them. Julien sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt myself. But I can't just pick up where we left off and pretend the past never happened." Elena's chest ached. "Then don't." Julien frowned slightly. She leaned in, her voice soft but steady. "Let's not pretend. Let's not erase the past, and let's not rush the future. Let's just be here, right now." Julien studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile, small and uncertain, tugged at the corners of his lips. "You still talk like a poet," he murmured. She smiled back, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "And you still act like a man too afraid to believe in happiness." Julien huffed a small laugh. "Maybe." A beat of silence. Then a decision. Julien reached for his coffee, taking a slow sip before setting it down. "All right." Elena blinked. "All right?" He nodded. "Stay. Have coffee with me. Let's start with that." A warmth spread through her chest. Not everything was healed, not everything was certain. But it was something. And sometimes something was enough. She picked up her cup, mirroring him. "Okay, she whispered. "Let's start with that." Outside, the streets of Paris glowed with golden light, the city whispering its approval. And inside, at a small café where love had once been left behind, it quietly found its way back home.